computer. Okay. So let's begin this event. Thank you everybody for joining. This is our annual event, the Legislative Debriefing, VACOLAO. So since 2010, we have been organizing every year. I guess it's now 11 times this debriefing. And it is always in person, but now we are hopefully next year we will be doing in person. And to have, it's always going to be different to have you in person, to greeting you, and also to share all our accomplishment and also what happened during the General Assembly. So today we will be talking about a very important legislation that we as a VACOLAO, in collaboration with BASIR, with Legal Aid Justice Center, Central Immigration Forum, Sin Barreras, and many organizations, and also with legislators, we work together and accomplish big wins. Especially, I want to thank Monica, BASIR, which this year were very involved in this process, and we work together to have this result. So we are very happy to have the financial aid eligibility state tuition for students, and also the protection of privacy information of Virginia drivers for all beneficiaries of the driver privilege card. And of course, we also have the identification privilege card for immigrants regardless of their legal status. We will discuss also the victories on healthcare legislation with Freddy Mejia from the Commonwealth Institute. So yeah, I really want to thank you for all your participation, and especially being part of this, what we have changed in Virginia. Virginia is different. When I began working in 2007, it was a totally different Virginia. And now we have a strong representation, a strong participation from our community, and this is making a really huge difference. So let's begin with our panel. So for that, the financial aid for eligibility in state tuition students, I want to welcome, we already have here Senator Jennifer Boysko and Delegate Alfonso Lopez. And also we will be joining us in this conversation, Nady Peralta, attorney from Legal Aid Justice Center. So let's begin. Senator Jennifer Boysko, please go ahead, and everybody's now listening to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edgar. It has been a pleasure to work with you all over the past few years. And as you just said, the progress that we've made has been unbelievable. I'm really proud of the work that we have done and the things that we have been able to accomplish, including in-state tuition, working to get financial aid, the driver's privilege card, the privacy. I mean, we can go on and on and on. I'm really, really pleased with the work we've done. You know, as of September 2019, 16 other states and the District of Columbia offered in-state tuition for our unauthorized immigrant students, and 7 states have given that authority through their university systems. And when folks came to us to talk about this, it was actually the Northam administration that asked us to carry the bill, because they believe that an educated society is a healthier and better, a stronger economy. And so we worked in collaboration with a number of groups, including VACOLAO, to set up this process. SHEV, the organization agency that oversees our higher education, will be working on the specifics of the process. But we have the money in place thanks to the budget amendment that Senator Ghazala Hashmi provided, and students will have access to financial aid with the provisions that are pretty much exactly the same as our in-state tuition allowance, which is students need to be here for 2 years, have graduated or gotten their GED, on or after 2008, and have the ability to show that someone in the family who is the head of the household is paying taxes in the community. I am sure that my good friend, Delegate Alfonso Lopez, has more to talk about. If y'all want to just, have him give some more input, and then we can have a conversation, I'm happy to do that. But we're just so thrilled and proud of the work that we've been able to do. It's been because you all have been organized and engaged, and really a major part of this process.
Thank you, Senator. Delegate Alfonso Lopez, please go ahead.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you all for being here today, and thank you for your partnership in this entire process. Edgar, I remember we were talking about this even before I was sworn in back in 2011 about the importance of eventually getting to this point. And to say that we have fundamentally changed Virginia for the better is an understatement. Not only have we passed the Dreamer agenda, including in-state tuition and financial aid equity, we've passed the de-ICE bill. We've passed, which is the first step in doing more that we need to address in that area. We've passed the driver's license or driver's identity cards. We've also passed legislation saying that if an individual is cooperating with the police and they're the victim or the witness of a crime, that they cannot be asked their immigration status. And then, which actually helps make everyone safer, but also gets rid of the issues in our community that where people were being preyed upon by bad actors who knew that they would never call the police because they were scared of themselves or a loved one getting caught up in the ICE detention process. So the in-state tuition bill, as you all know, was the first bill I put in every year in the House Delegates. It was the first bill that I would talk about. It was the thing I would get up on the floor and just, sort of passionately tell folks we need to get this done because we're leaving thousands upon thousands of kids behind. And I'm very proud of the work that we've done. Just also Edgar and I had this conversation a couple years ago. I've loved, since the Democrats have taken the majority, that the ugly, divisive, wrong-headed, anti-immigrant speeches on the floor that I felt like for years I'd have to be the only person getting up and defending new Americans and immigrants in the Latino population, they've stopped. It's fascinating how that works when the Democrats take over. But what I'm very proud of with the Dream Act, and also what we've done with the financial aid equity bill, is it's been a long period of negotiations, convincing folks. And so I remember, having very frank and open discussions with then candidate Ralph Northam and saying, as governor, you need to make sure that this is something you are focused on. And I'm very proud of the fact that he was true to his word. He had the full support of his entire administration, Secretary Atif Carney, everyone, the AG as well, Attorney General Mark Herring has been a hero on this issue since when he first signed the Chev letter back in the first months of his tenure as the Attorney General, reversing what former Attorney General Cuccinelli had done, and sort of the wrong-headed approach he took. So what we have here is just some facts. There are 270,000 undocumented immigrants who live in Virginia, 3.2% of the population. Half of those undocumented Virginians have lived in the US for more than a decade. They've built their lives here, developed careers here, and annually contribute over $250 million in Virginia state and local taxes. And although these taxes help pay for Virginia's entire education system, the vast majority of undocumented Virginia students are deprived of the same opportunity to access state-based financial aid as any other Virginia taxpayer. So what we were able to do, building on the DREAM Act that and the in-state tuition bill we passed last year, was through SB 1387, Senator Boysko's bill, and my bill, HB 2123, we were able to provide undocumented students who were covered by last year's landmark in-state tuition bill with equitable access to state financial assistance programs. And this would include state need-based aid programs for public institutions, as well as tuition assistance grants or TAG grants, also G3 and the other institutional programs. And so in order to qualify for financial aid, students have to meet the same criteria they met for the in-state tuition bill. And we all know that financial aid is really crucial in supporting student college enrollment. So even though we had in-state tuition, we needed to have fairness and equity when it came to financial aid as well to truly have an even playing field, or as much as we could have an even playing field. So, and here's the problem and why we're having a couple, like it has a delayed enactment, or it's a delayed enactment. Currently, in order to receive need-based state financial aid, students must submit the free application for federal student aid forms, FAFSA, administered by the U.S. Department of Education. And the results of this form are what are used to determine a student's need and eligibility for need-based aid. So since undocumented students are currently at the federal level ineligible to complete the FAFSA forms, we had to extend state financial aid to, we have to extend financial aid to these students would have required a development of a comparable process. And so to get that up and running, it's going to take a little bit of time. But for that reason, that's why we have the enactment clause for August of 22, which means students entering in the fall of 22 will be able to take advantage of the new provision. Senator Hashmi got the funding for us. We were able to defend it on the House side. It was surprising how partisan this whole process has been. Inevitably, every single Democrat votes for it, every single Republican votes against it. And that's something we still need to address going forward as an organization, as a community. But I'm incredibly thankful for all of you, for all of your support, for all of your work with myself and Senator Boysko over the last few years, and for me over the last decade, working to get this done. And you all know the story. My mom was the ESL Hill guidance counselor at W&L High School, working with Emma Viola Sanchez, helping found the DREAM project. Because of her, over 1,000 dreamers, even before we called them dreamers, not only graduate from high school, they graduate from college. So this is incredibly personal to me. My father was undocumented. He came to this country at the age of 19 with $270 in his pocket, overstayed his tourist visa, and was undocumented. And he got his green card in 5 days in the 1950s. Very different time. But it was important that this bill get done because education is the most important thing that we can be focusing on, really, for any issue. And if we're going to empower and grow a Latino and New American and immigrant support in Virginia, education is the key to do it. And so, and also we can't be putting up stop signs to folks who have amazing talent and know no other country or other home but the United States and Virginia. And so I just cannot thank you enough, Edgar, and everyone at VACOLAO, and for everything you've done over the last decade to help get us to this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Alfonso Lopez. It was great working with you during this General Assembly. To talk more about this legislation, Nady Peralta, attorney from Legal Aid Justice Center, she will walk through this legislation. Nady.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'll just echo some of the sentiments from Senator Boysko and Mr. Lopez as well, because it really has been incredibly heartening to work in partnership with you all and to see how much support there is for the community to work together and make these legislations possible. So thank you all for your partnership. I know that we just went over a little bit of what the legislation includes. So what is the sort of the boundaries of eligibility, tuition equity law. It matches precisely with the in-state tuition bill that was passed last year, as we know. So we've expanded financial aid at the state level to a number of students who were ostensibly able to access higher ed because they would have been domiciled under the last year's law, but still had that obstacle of financial aid. We know that realistically that continued to be an obstacle. So it's wonderful that we've been able to put in place a plan that by 2022 should make this available to so many more immigrant students. What I will say, though, is that there is always room for more advocacy. There are people who fall just short of this 2-year mark, or there are people whose immigrant statuses are complicated or don't fall cleanly into some of the guidelines that are out. So we will continue going forward to advocate on behalf of those students and to find ways to cooperate with with SHEV, with legislators, with community leaders and community members to make this a possibility for more and more people, as many people as we can. So right now what we're working on is making progress with SHEV in setting up the plan for what the application is going to look like and what the application process is going to look like for students who are newly eligible for financial aid at the state level. So that's coming up. And then in the long term, hopefully we can carry this momentum forward and find ways to make higher education more available to more and more immigrant students, new Americans, new Virginians. Thank you all. I'll open the floor for any questions.
If you have questions, please unmute yourself and you can do the questions directly.
Can you repeat again what's need to be accepted for financial aid in the state?
Sure. So that's you have to have been a high school student for 2 years, and you have to have graduated from Virginia high school. You have to have the head of household paying Virginia taxes, and I feel there was one more that's escaping me right now. Let's see. Okay, so you have to have lived in Virginia for 2 years, paid Virginia taxes for 2 years, graduated from a Virginia high school. Another thing that comes up is the work that the school has to do in identifying students who fit into that criteria. So that's something that we continue to work on and figure out what is the best way to handle it, because it's not just that you meet those criteria, but you have to know that you're eligible to apply for these things. And the school also has to know how to reach out to these students who fall into these gaps, being new legislation.
You need funding to actually sort of advertise this. We need to make sure that the whole world knows this is available to them. And so we want to have information about this in front of every financial aid office for every public university and community college and private university in Virginia. And then also make sure that high schools have it as well.
Yeah, because I work with high schools, now I am in middle school, but I'm preparing the kids to go to college here. And normally I tell the parents what they can do. That's why I need to know exactly what they need to do.
And this is in line with what other states have done. Actually, Virginia is a little bit more progressive than a lot of other states. Many of them have a 3-year requirement for residency in high school. So, California is a little bit more restrictive than we are. So we're right there with the states as far as eligibility of how long you have to be here. There was a student who, a reporter reached out to me last week because a student had come in and he started school in the middle of his junior year. And so he only had 1.5 years of school, and that wasn't long enough to provide his eligibility, which, that's a problem. So the other thing, if school administrators are thinking about this, if a student comes in, that they might want to keep that in mind. If there's some sort of question of where the student should be placed, just food for thought.
I also want to answer some of the questions in the chat about the taxes. So the student themselves don't have to be the ones doing the taxes, although they can if they're an emancipated minor, which is also kind of a rabbit hole. So in that case, I think I'd just advise them to give our office a call and we can go in through the details. But generally, it's the head of household who has to have been filing taxes. If you're undocumented, you're still able to file taxes. You would need to get an ITIN number, a tax identification number, rather than a social, but it doesn't preclude you from filing. So you may have to get an ITIN and then file back taxes if you've been here for the past 2 years. That's something that might have to happen in order to prove your eligibility. But being undocumented isn't a barrier to that.
We still have time for one more or 2 questions. If you have another question, please, you can write it in the chat or you can do it directly.
Are there going to be mandatory for the high schools to teach this to our children, that they have this opportunity?
That's my my goal is that we actually put this into part of Chev's guidance to all high schools in Virginia.
And it looked like Gaston had a question for Ms. Peralta about explaining the complicated status of some of the students and wondering if you could give an example of that. I brought up one, which was a student came in, he's been here for 4 years, but he entered school as a second semester junior, and he didn't have 2 full years in the high school program, which knocks him out of the eligibility. But did you have any other issues that you wanted to share?
Well, I want to, I guess, clarify. So it says immigrant students with complicated status won't be able to apply for financial aid. And I don't think that that's exactly right. So that's not, I guess, what I meant to convey. It's more like it's not as straightforward. So depending on what your immigration background is, it may be that you just have to clarify something for the school, provide some additional paperwork, or it may be that you can't qualify through this statute for in-state domicile or in-state financial aid. But that doesn't mean necessarily that you're blocked off completely. It just means that you have to see if you qualify under statutes that were already in place. And that's something that the reason I said it was complicated was because it requires interpretation of the law, which, as we all know, schools don't really do that. They have the guidelines and they apply the guidelines. So it takes going a little bit further. So you might have to go through the domicile appeals within the school. You may have to go through a court process and have a judge interpret it if it requires you to go that far. So it's hard to say at this point exactly what would be needed because it also depends so much on the facts of a particular case. But what I mean to convey by that is that this law might be straightforward for many students, but it might not be straightforward for all of them. And the fact that you do qualify in the first instance, if you get a rejection letter, that doesn't mean necessarily that you do not qualify. It just means that you may have to take an extra step. And in those cases, that's where I mentioned it would be a good idea to reach out to our office so we can see what options are available to you.
Kid can ask for other class and stay 1 more year in high school. And like in math, if they call the class, he take 1 more. And don't graduate in a year.
The problem in that situation is a Venezuelan immigrant who is actually 20 years old now and has been in community college or trying to go to community college. And so he's already graduated from high school, even though that we know now he should have stayed for 2 years. It's a bit of a crack in the system.
And this law is to get out of the high school immediately, or can some people didn't stop study because they didn't have money? And let's see, 3 or 4 years later, now have the law you can use?
If they no, the problem is that's part of the issue is that they can't go if they've already graduated from high school, they can't go back, and so that's the problem.
But now in high school, in college, let's see if they graduated, didn't have a money, and they stopped study and has 3 or 4 years. Now we have the law. Can they ask for?
So
No, sorry, Jennifer.
I was going to say, if they didn't have so you have to go back to the provision of the bill. If they did not have 2 years prior to getting out of high school, they have to have 2 years of high school. They have to live in the country for 2 years. Their family has to pay, their head of household has to pay taxes in Virginia. So if you graduated from high school, that's it. But if you did those things and you're a little bit older and you haven't gone to college, you could,
Yeah,
you have to.
Some people live here for 20 years, I don't know, and then have more, but they cannot pay. And
Well, the question, yeah, I don't want to interrupt you, but you have to have graduated on or after 2008. So I know some of my friends who have been fighting for this don't qualify because they're too old. So it's really, it's a little bit of a tight walk what we were able to get through, but those are not flexibilities. So.
And 2008 is a function of the federal law in terms of DACA, and so we had to comply with the federal law.
No, okay.
So thank you very much, Marcia. It's a good question.
Can I ask one more question about that?
Yeah, we have only 2 minutes. Go
Okay,
ahead,
sorry
Cindy.
about that. You did said that they have to live in 2 years in the country and 2 years in high school. Is that including out of Virginia high school? Let's say another student comes from another state, but they're still in high school and they used to do 1 year in high school right here in Virginia. Do they count?
They have to be in Virginia. One of the concerns was that people, because we have such excellent colleges and universities, that people were going to come who are regular from all over the country. These are specifically for people who have lived in Virginia for the 2 years, have gone to 2 years of Virginia school before graduating and graduated from a school here in Virginia.
We tried to make it 1 year to make it even with everyone else, but to get it through the Senate and to get it through some of the more conservative members of both the Republican and the conservative members of the House and Senate, we had to do 2 years.
Okay, thank you for clearing it up.
Well, thank you very much. This is definitely an issue that we will be working to spread the word, especially there is going to be more questions. And the good thing is we, with Legal Aid Justice Center, are working to educate the community and to address also issues that will come. So thank you very much, Senator Boysko, and also Delegate Alfonso Lopez, and also Nady Peralta. Thank you very much for being in very important conversation. So just seconds to say bye to the community.
One thing I have to say, Nady Peralta does amazing work, and the Legal Aid Justice Society, everyone over there, really need to be commended for all the amazing work they do in helping us and helping the community. And so thank you very much to them. All of them except for Simon Sandoval Motionberg. He's horrible, but everyone else is great.
Thanks, Alfonso. It's always nice to see you too.
Okay. Well,
See y'all with your work, and you have a great day.
Thank you, Senator Boysko. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your partnership and thank you for your enthusiasm.
Okay, thank you, Nady. Okay, now we are moving to another very important panel. This is one of the, I will say, many people will contact us to talk about. They were very concerned about the private information that they are provided to the DMV. And Simon was, I will say, he has the vision to do this thing, even against all the odds. It was kind of difficult to think that this would happen. And then I saw how Basira, Luis Oyola, and Monica, and Diane, Simon, Seokyeong, so many people got together and began working on this. So this with a delegate, Kathy Trump. If we wouldn't have Delegate Kathy Trump working on this, it wouldn't happen. And also with the work of Senator Scott Surovell, Senator Boysko as well, and many others. So for that discussion, very important information, I am inviting here for this panel, Delegate Kathy Trump, as well as Senator Scott Surovell and Simon Sandoval Motionberg, Legal Director of Legal Aid Justice Center. So Delegate Kathy Trump, please go ahead, and thank you very much for joining us at this important event.
Good morning, Edgar. Good morning, everybody. VACOLAO, how are you? What a great day to be celebrating some of our achievements this year in the legislative session. I'm Kathy Tran. I represent the 42nd District, which is in Southeast and Southern Fairfax County. And I am so glad to be working with all of you on the customer privacy, DMV customer privacy data bill this year. But before we talk about this bill, let's just celebrate our driver privilege cards. We just got this week from the DMV commissioner that through April, the DMV has issued 12,812 driver privilege cards throughout Virginia. So I think that is a huge accomplishment of the advocacy that everybody on this webinar today has really put in through the years. And I know certainly before I was elected, you all had been pushing for this, right? And I am so glad that we passed it. It took effect in January, and in just 4 months, we've had almost 13,000 driver privilege cards issued. So yay. And so then the big question is, what happens when we give all this information to the DMV? And we worked really hard together with all the different organizations and leaders that Edgar had mentioned to make sure that we are able to pass as strong privacy protections as possible in Virginia. And I know, so the caveat to that is, as we were heading to the Senate, the chair there said, you got to come up with a compromise with some of the data broker and data firms. And so I think that we knew that was out there, that we had to kind of work together to figure out the best way forward. And I really do believe this is the strongest bill we could have come out with. But essentially, we provide so much data and information to the DMV. It's everything from how we look physically to our address and our phone number, to sometimes for some of us, even our medical conditions. And the DMV has 4,000 data sharing agreements with different partners that they're allowed to have through federal law and state law, as well as a number of different criminal justice and agencies through the Virginia State Police. And that definitely includes ICE. And I think for our community, the biggest concern, as we've all seen how ICE is tapping into DMV data in other states. So what we've done here is basically ensured that the DMV can only share private data, customer data, with people they have a written agreement with, that that data can only then be shared with other agencies if that, under the conditions that the DMV has already laid out. And then for access through ICE, what we've ensured is that ICE can only access our DMV data if they have, for federal immigration enforcement purposes, if they have a court order or a warrant, but having to go through that judicial system and not just kind of their own willy-nilly administrative system. And I think that was really important to the advocates, and we were able to achieve that. But I think overall, what we're going to see is a much stronger, where some of these things the DMV had in place already, but we were able to put it into law so that if there's ever a new DMV commissioner and new leadership, that they're still bound by these guidelines and these best practices that we have. And I think the other piece that's a big concern is, agencies, when they get the information, particularly data sharing broker firms, is when they get the information, how do they then pass it on? And we've tried as much as possible to put into law saying you can only pass it on for it to be used for the reasons that it was given in the first place, that you can't get the information and then use it for other reasons. And so I know that there's, I think in the future, one of the things we need to consider is the ability to enforce some of these provisions, but I think we have a solid first step.
Thank you, Delegate Tran. Also, I would like to welcome Senator Scott Surobel. Senator is already in the group.
Hey, Edgar.
Senator, go ahead. Hi, Senator.
Hi. Yeah, and thank you for having me. And I think this was a big session as well for legislative issues relating to our immigrant community. And I think we'll continue to have these kinds of successes as long as we have these majorities in place. So hopefully we can keep that up. I'm going to sort of pick up where Kathy left off. Getting this bill through was, there's no question that this needs an enforcement mechanism. Right now, the only method of enforcement, if one of these companies were to violate it, is the DMV can cut them off or bring a lawsuit against them. And the DMV doesn't have lots of lawyers sitting around to bring lawsuits over these things. And I'd like to see there be a private right of action contained in the law, so that if any person is harmed, because their information is shared inappropriately, they can bring a lawsuit to enforce the statute or the DMV's agreements. I've actually talked to the DMV. I've actually talked to the DMV about that before this session, and they were open to it because that would obviously reduce some of their enforcement expenses. But there's already some limited ability to do that under the DPPA, the driver, I forget what it's called, the Driver Privacy Protection Act, which is a federal law, but it doesn't apply to all the information that we've covered in this bill. The federal law is not nearly as broad as these state protections that we built in for the situations we're worried about. So we need to have that enforcement remedies. So these companies know if they violate the contract, that there'll be consequences for it. So that's definitely a next step we need to look at next session. One other thing I just wanted to point out, one of the reasons it was that getting this bill through had some challenges, or we really had to be careful about how we did it and what we said in it, is that there were some other states have tried to enact similar legislation, which was probably a little more aggressive than ours, just complete bans on data sharing. And the problem that created was it jeopardized those states' participation in certain federal travel programs. The federal government has its, they call it their Trusted Traveler Program, where you, one of them's called, and then that's the umbrella term for them all, but you have like global entry, and then you have the, I forget what the other one's called, where you can get on the plane faster. There's different levels of it, but where you can skip the security line or not have to take off your shoes or whatever. Anyway, in order for the federal government to be able to do those kinds of plans, they have to have access to state licensing data. And if we don't give them enough access, then they start to say, we're not going to let your people participate in those programs from your state. And if we had passed a law that would have created that sort of a backlash in the federal government, it would have created a real backlash towards this law from everybody. There's a lot of people that benefit from those programs to get through the lines quicker for security. So we were able to do that. And, we haven't seen the same kind of reaction from customs and customs enforcement, ICE or whatever. And so I think we've got a law that's going to work. And so I'm happy we're able to do it so that people have peace of mind when they go get this driver privilege card, that there's not going to be an ICE agent knocking on their door in a month or two or next year or something. And then we also protected them so that if there's ever a change in the administration, we have a different governor with a different perspective on these things, that DMV is just not going to swing open the door to all this data. So, but it was a good accomplishment, and appreciate all the help that you all provided and helping us get something that worked, because it definitely took a lot of work.
Thank you, Senator Surabel. Now is Simon Sandoval.
Great. Hi, thanks. Yes. So I'm Simon Sandoval Motionberg. I'm the legal director of the Immigrant Advocacy Program at the Legal Aid Justice Center. We're a statewide organization based out of Charlottesville, and I'm based out of Falls Church. So by way of a little bit of background, the original DPC law passed in 2020 did contain some privacy protections, especially with, and then there was also a separate sort of standalone privacy law that Delegate Ayala put forward, which also passed, which already contained some privacy protections around, for example, the identification documents, right? So if someone is using a Honduran passport to prove that their name is in fact Juan Vasquez, that Honduran passport was already protected. But what we've seen from the, more than a dozen states that have already had these DPCs or driver's licenses for many, many years, is that far and away the number one use that ICE actually makes of this data is not to generate targets, right? They don't go into a DMV database in Maryland and say, pull up all the Hondurans and let's see who's Honduran. Rather, far and away the biggest use that they make is address information, right? They're already looking for Juan Vasquez. They don't know, because he missed his court date 2 years ago, and so he was ordered deported in absentia for not showing up to his court date, what have you. They're already looking for Juan Vasquez. They don't know where to find him. They just pop into the DMV database, a couple keystrokes, they've got his address. And that was left basically unprotected from the 2020 legislation. So that's what we needed to do here. In 2020, Delegate Tran also put forward a bill to protect this. Interestingly, I mean, of course, Delegate Tran and the community did a lot of work around that bill in 2020, but we were sort of going based on an incorrect factual assumption, which was that ICE was getting their information by directly tapping into the Virginia DMV database. And what we learned doing research over the course of 2020 in preparation for the 2021 session was that the ICE Virginia DMV user agreement had actually expired a couple of years prior, and ICE didn't even bother to renew it. And the reason that they didn't even bother to renew it was that they were already getting everything they needed from the Virginia State Police. And not to get too in the weeds, but there's through the Virginia Criminal Information Network, the VCIN database, it was essentially a hop, skip, and a jump to get all of the DMV data. And so they didn't need the direct DMV use agreement because they were getting it all indirectly through the VSP portal. But all this stuff was just swirling between these various databases without any sort of protections whatsoever, right? So I go and change my address with the DMV within a matter of minutes. It's also updated with Virginia State Police. Within a matter of minutes, ICE now has access to my current address. So it was very important for 2021 for this bill that we really look hard at cracking down, not just on the DMV direct agreements with users, but also the Virginia State Police. And that's what the legislation this year did very effectively. And for that reason, I'm actually glad that it's this year's version that got passed rather than the version that was put forward in 2020, because I think that a lot of gaping holes got patched up this year. Interestingly, on the politics of it, I was fascinated to see that there was no with the exception of one or two Republican state senators who would push back on anything that has anything to do to the benefit of immigrants. Generally speaking, within the Democratic caucus, from all ends of the Democratic caucus, there was zero pushback whatsoever on the notion of stopping ICE from getting driver data for the purpose of civil immigration enforcement. I mean, that was just like a given. Like, all of the questions, all of the problems, all of the concerns that Delegate Tran got on both sides, in both chambers, was about the for-profit data brokers. And there was zero pushback about the notion that we can't let ICE just dip directly into our DMV database or indirectly by means of our Virginia State Police database to just grab names and addresses of immigrants. That was a given. And so I think that's hugely important as we look forward to 2022 with regards to, obviously the DMV is the state agency that has the most information on Virginians, probably tied with the Virginia Department of Revenue, right? But there are plenty of other agencies as well that also leak data to ICE either regularly or from time to time. I would say that there is appetite within the Democratic caucus to make sure that those agencies don't do that either. I will give an example of a person who filed, this was a person in one of the Richmond suburbs about a year and a half ago, who filed a claim with one of the Virginia workforce agencies. And then as a result of that information, that was sort of, ICE requested that information without a court order, without a warrant, and that agency gave the data to ICE, just sort of as a matter of course, without even thinking twice. Where the rubber really meets the road on all of this, of course, is criminal justice, right? Information about people who are arrested, even on the most minor of charges, even on a drunk in public, right? We have done a little bit of work. Senator Sandoval put forward a bill in 2019 that slightly reduced, that allowed individual sheriffs and regional jails to stop sending information in certain cases if people were booked in on arrest, but not yet a conviction and not a felony. But that's since that's sort of optional of the various jails in the Commonwealth, implementation of that has been extremely limited so far. And so I think that one of the lessons of this bill is that we could pass next year a bill going further on some of this information sharing directly with ICE. But leaving that aside, there is still, even just talking directly with regards to the DMV, there's still work that needs to be done with regards to implementation, right? And making sure that DMV really does what it needs to do, and especially making sure that the Virginia State Police really do what they need to do. Because this legislation that we passed this year, as I said, there's databases that are deeply connected and the data is swirling, right? And the legislation does not, physically take those databases and unplug them from each other, right? And so instead, what it does is it creates a requirement that there be various certifications, right? Essentially, remember that ICE does not only engage in civil immigration enforcement. They also, for example, prosecute child pornography cases, right? And so now those are different sort of branches within ICE, but it's still all ICE, right? And so, you start saying things like child pornography, everyone's like, oh, okay, obviously if they're investigating a child pornography, for potential federal prosecution, they need to be able to get whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want it, right? Whereas when they're engaged in civil immigration enforcement, we now agree, and it is now, state law, that they not be able to get it unless they come forward with a judicial warrant, an order or a subpoena, a judicial subpoena, something of that nature, right? So what we're really talking about is the individual, John Q. ICE agent certifying the purpose for which he's making a request on any given Monday, right? And that certification needs to be created, that literally that click box needs to be created between now and July 1st. And then we need to actually do some real enforcement and auditing to make sure that it's actually being used properly. Now you might think, well, then this was all a waste of time. ICE lies, we know that. ICE lies as a matter of course, ICE lies, as easily as they breathe. In fact, several states have done this, California being the biggest. And what they found in California is that rather than going through this certification provision, ICE instead just sort of pulled out and pulled back from this particular manner of gathering and collecting data on individual targets. And so it is actually, a meaningful thing. But the last thing I'll say, sort of speaking of California, what did ICE do in California after they pulled out of directly accessing California DMV database because they didn't want to go through the certification process? What did they do? They turned around and bought it all from LexisNexis. They turned around and bought it all from Thomson Reuters at a very low price, right? Essentially without blinking an eye. And they were able to keep doing exactly what they were doing. They just had to do it off of a commercial platform rather than directly through, the DMV database. And they were really able to do that without so much as a hiccup in operations in California. And so that's why all this stuff about the commercial data brokers, which might seem at first glance like a total sideshow, and like, why are we spending so much time and effort? Obviously none of us love the idea of our data being packaged and sold, but is that really the most important thing? The answer is yeah, it's really important, because what we've seen in other states that didn't crack down on the commercial data brokers is that, ICE simply writes a check and buys whatever they need from a third party, and they're able to continue doing everything they do. So all of these things are things that need to be really watched closely, right? I mean, DMV needs to, DMV could, for example, in December of this year, DMV could, spend a couple bucks, jump on LexisNexis, and find out in about 20 minutes whether LexisNexis is actually doing what they're promising to do, right? Whether they're actually complying with the certifications. So all of these things are things that, we, the community, need to really ride the DMV and especially the Virginia State Police pretty hard to make sure that they're actually doing what the statute requires them to do. But finally, the last thing I would say with regards to driver's licenses is, you know, the DPC is great. The DPC is super important, but we still need eventually, I don't know about this coming year, but we still need to push for full non-real ID driver's licenses, right? And that ultimately there should not be a thing called DPCs. DPCs is a transition to get us where we need to go, which is full driver's license. And the reason for that is, you know, we just talked to a social worker just about a month and a half ago of a kid who, you know, he's an undocumented immigrant, special immigrant juvenile status, he's in foster care, right? So he's coming out of foster care at the age of 18. He doesn't work. So he can't get a DPC, right? Because he doesn't have any Virginia income. The Virginia DPC is directly tied to either working or being the dependent of someone who works, right? And there's lots of people who don't work, but nonetheless, you know, need the right to drive legally. And the and you know, DMV is also having a lot of implementation problems with regards to this taxation requirement, because it's something they've never ever had to do before, right? When I go in to get a driver's license, when I go in to renew my driver's license, they don't ask me if I've paid taxes. I don't need to prove that I've paid taxes, right? So the ultimate solution to all of that is full-on non-real ID driver's license. You know, that's where eventually we need to get. Maybe not this coming year, but that's where we need to get.
Thank you, Simon. We have a little time for a question. So you can do it directly and mute yourself, please.
So I have I'll just restate my question from the chat. First, thank you all so much for coming here for the debrief and for all the work you did on this very important bill. Like Simon alluded to, you know, like in my work, I've gotten a lot of comments from, like, for example, undocumented parents who fear signing up for benefits that their children qualify for, such as food stamps or Medicaid, because they assume that the agency is either going to just give that information ICE, or that it's going to be a public charge, which is a separate issue. But so do you all anticipate tackling privacy concerns in other government agencies?
I think that is going to be an issue that we have to look at. My understanding, if I recall correctly, right, we passed an overall kind of like internet privacy bill that exempted state agencies. And so the fact that we were then able to pass a separate customer data privacy bill for the DMV is really important, right? Even though I know that the other bill kind of addressed some other similar but different issues around data that you provide. But you know, through internet using and things, usage and stuff like that. But I think what's going to be really important as we suss out where, like, you know, this example that Simon had shared in his presentation about, I think it was the unemployment insurance benefits, Luis, your comments today, I think it's going to be really important to figure out where are some of the loopholes and who's sharing what, right? And as we figure out what next steps are. I'm up for kind of delving into that issue, and I think it's going to be really important in terms of ensuring that people, I think of it like it's an equity issue. People aren't going to access the services that they have a right to access if they're worried about this issue. So
yeah. Edgar, can I say I agree with everything Kathy said. You know, all these data issues are a hornet's nest, and Virginia just passed a law this year, which was the Senator Marsden and Delegate Hayes. It was the second in the country Data Protection Act or something. I forget what they called it. I voted against it because it didn't have the right for individuals to sue to enforce their privacy rights over their own data. It's the only area of the law I know where somebody can take something about you and you have to go get the Attorney General to sue for you because you're not allowed to sue yourself. And that overarching data law plays into this problem. We also passed a separate new cause of action for data broker liability when it comes to criminal history records and expungements. That was part of my bill with Delegate Herring that passed. I'm also in the middle of several different cases I'm litigating right now in my private capacity as a lawyer, suing some of these data broker companies for trading inaccurate data about people. But once you get into it and you start to see all the information that they're sucking up for people and packaging and trading around, it's terrifying. I mean, trying to get it under control is going to be really, really hard. I mean, at least we can have some control on what the government gives out, but it's once it's out, it's the Wild West out there right now, and we need to start getting a handle on it. And it all kind of ties in together. Simon gave a good explanation of some of it, but it's really the new frontier, and the immigration angle is just one angle of many wrapped up in this. I mean, right now Google can tell you where I had dinner last night and how I drove to the Nats game. I mean, it's scary stuff that's out there.
I think I'd like to add, I mean, I think Simon mentioned that there wasn't any pushback really on this bill except from the private data broker pieces. And I think partly that is there was a lot of kind of pre-work done to make sure that we had a bill where the DMV felt like they could, you know, that it matched their best practices that they either had in place, or if there were changes to their practices that they could handle those changes, right? Like there could have been a couple of different options we took where it might have cost the DMV extra staff to do audits or something like that, for example. And so they were able to they were able to absorb the changes in this law. Some of it was putting into the law their best practices already, so they were on board. And the prior to last summer, the DMV had no oversight at all of any of the data sharing agreements that the Virginia State Police entered into, which is kind of crazy, right? Because the police is entering into data sharing agreements that are using DMV data, but the DMV didn't have a say in that. And so last summer we had talked about that. We had actually put it into the draft bill that into the bill on data privacy protections I put in last year that didn't pass. And so what happened was in the summer, the DMV and the state police came up with a memorandum of understanding, an agreement about the DMV's role and the oversight they were going to play into any new data agreements that the police entered into. And so we were actually able to incorporate the framework of that MOU into this bill and build just a little bit on it. But it was important that they had laid that foundation. And so the state police generally were on board with this bill. And so I think that helped to pave the way for us not to get as much pushback. But I think any type of looking at how the state government is going to share data with others. And I think what's important is, and I think Scott just said this very aptly, it's about everybody's data that's being shared. And immigrants and undocumented immigrants are a really important constituency, but it's one of many groups of people. Because I think if we have a privacy conversation, the bigger the coalition, the better it's going to be. And so I think we'd have to look at that and figure out kind of how it affects people. How do we tell that story? Who are all the different stakeholders that are going to want to have a say in that? And as much as working through kind of how do you meet everybody's needs, whether it's federal law that has certain requirements or how people use data currently based on Virginia code and such, it's going to be, that's part of the complicated conversation to have about it. I just wanted to flag why I think this bill was able to go through a little bit more smoothly this year than.
Okay, so thank you very much. This is very important discussion. We really ran out of time. I would like to thank Senator Scott Surovell, Delegate Kathy Tram, Simon Sandoval. Thank you very much. We'll be definitely working together to improve legislation, to pass new legislation, and to defend legislation. So thank you very much. I guess just a few words before you leave.
Edgar, I don't have much to say. I just appreciate working with you all. I mean, I have 2 other bills I passed this year, which I think are going to also help people feel a little more safe. You know, we continue to have these victories, and just the important thing is everybody needs to make sure they vote. You got to hold on to the House of Delegates this year. That's if we want to keep having these types of successes, it will only happen if the House of Delegates stays in Democratic control. So I hope everybody votes.
Thank you, Senator. Just to remind everybody that this is a non-partisan event, but we definitely listen. Senator, thank you for your message. Delegate Catitran.
I really appreciate it. I just want to, all our legislative wins this year have been because of the advocacy of VACOLAO and so many organizations. And I think it's so important, and it for people to write about to your representative about the things that you care about. Oh, you pressed the button, y'all went away. That what's really important to you, and the fact that you stand and, you know, this year you couldn't come to the General Assembly, but either are writing to us, meeting with us, having rallies, and being present and sharing your stories. It takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of time, and it's so important to do. So thank you so much for your advocacy and for all of your help in getting this bill and the other wins through this year.
Thank you, Delegate Catitran. Simon?
Just following up on what Delegate Tran said, sort of her mention in passing that we weren't able to come to the State House this year. As a result of the virtual session this year, impacted on all types of legislation, immigrants' rights legislation, criminal justice legislation, impacted community members were able to have their voice heard in a way that I haven't seen before, given the difficulties in coming to Richmond if you're not from the Richmond area, given the difficulties in last minute scheduling of relevant hearings, given the difficulties of sitting through an entire docket waiting for your particular bill to be called if you're a worker who's paid by the hour. And we saw this year the testimony of directly impacted community members in a way that I thought was deeply meaningful, but also didn't crash the system entirely, right? I mean, yes, some committee hearings took an hour longer than they otherwise might have, but they didn't take 5 hours longer. And so I hope that the General Assembly on both sides, as we move back into an in-person world, a post-pandemic world, will look at ways to continue to facilitate virtual participation in subcommittee and committee hearings, so that people, so that especially low-income folks, workers, community members from around the Commonwealth can continue to participate in the way that they did this year.
Thank you, Simon. Okay, so now I would like to welcome Delegate Elizabeth Guzman. We are going to discuss now the identification privilege card for immigrants regardless of their legal status. Delegate Elizabeth Guzman, thank you for all your work. We have for driver privilege card, but now we will have an identification privilege card. Delegate Guzman, please go ahead.
Thank you, Edgar, and good morning to everyone. It is always nice to be here. And yes, this year we can take the victory that we passed the ID privilege cards for all citizens in Virginia, regardless of their immigrant status, in just one try. And I would be remiss if I don't recognize the years of advocacy and lobbying efforts from different organizations and different individuals who are here with us today. So I think that your work paid back, that is how we get it done. And for me, it was about, looking at our community, the Latinx community. We know that there are many individuals who are not comfortable driving, but are trying to just get an identification card so they don't have to disclose their immigration status anytime they have to go to the bank, or if they want to pick up their children from school or drop them off late, or go to the library, and when they're asked for an identification card, number one, they have to pay these scammers, a lot of price to just get a fake ID. And then at the end of the day, the little money they have to go and spend it when it's not right. So now having them having the opportunity to issue a government ID, I think it provides to them a sense of belonging and also that they are part of that community. And the reality is that regardless of their immigration status, they are still, you know, paying taxes when they do their grocery shopping here. They are paying taxes when they, you know, go and purchase stuff in the Commonwealth. So it is the right thing to do. And also it's gonna improve also the conditions and life for children in the Commonwealth. You know, those children that are the dreamers, you know, that come with their parents are looking an American dream for them and their children as well. So they will be able to have a government ID as well. So I think it is extremely important, you know, that they will get access to the document, and this will be the law starting January 1st, 2022. And I'm very excited for that. Thank you so much for your support. So if you have any questions, I'm here to answer those questions. Thank you, Edgar.
Thank you, Delegate Elisa Guzman. If you have a question, we have a few minutes for one question.
And while you are preparing your questions, I would like to add up, you know, that it's there is another piece of legislation also that is extremely important, that now pregnant women in Virginia who do not have legal presence in the Commonwealth will be able to have prenatal coverage. In the past, they only have coverage at the time of delivery, but this time it's going to be, they will be able to get prenatal care. And I think that is extremely important. Now they will be able to get an identification card as well. And with that, you know, paid sick leave also for home health care workers, when we know that there's many individuals that are providing that service will have access to 40 days of paid sick leave.
Thank you, Delegate Elisa Guzman. Actually, Freddy Mejia from the Commonwealth Institute will be developing that issue, which you mentioned, which is great for our community. So, Delegate, we will be with you during the afternoon for our discussion in Spanish with our community. So we really appreciate that you join us to talk about this important bill, the Identification Privilege Card, which is so much needed. So thank you, Delegate. So we look forward to see you then during the afternoon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Edgar. Very nice to see everyone. And for those who are joining us later for the Spanish version, look forward to seeing you as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Now I would like to welcome Freddy Mejia. He works with Commonwealth Institute, has been doing and leading the coalition Healthcare for All Virginians. Yeah, thank you. We really appreciate, Freddy, the leadership that you provide us for these big issues, and has become a law, which is very important for the community. So now what we need to do is to spread the word and to educate the community about the new rights, the new legislation that they should definitely should know and use it. So welcome, Freddy Mejia, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Edgar, for the invitation, and good morning, everyone. As Edgar mentioned, my name is Freddy Mejia. I'm a health policy analyst at the Commonwealth Institute. It's a research and advocacy organization that focuses on state policy issues that affect low and moderate income Virginians, as well as communities of color. So as part of my work there, I co-lead the Healthcare for All Virginians Coalition, which I'll be focusing on during this conversation. And the coalition is made up of over or nearly 100 organizations. So the policy wins that I'm going to share are through the work of many people, many organizations, including some on this call. So just want to make sure that everyone gets their due on that. And I'm just going to talk about some recent policy wins and then briefly touch on some current inequities that could be part of our next steps. The first kind of area that we worked on was maternal health. And our interest in this was due to the fact that Black women are more likely to die during birth or in the days and weeks after birth than compared to their white counterparts. So that's the case in Virginia, that is the case in the United States, and it's obviously a serious concern. Now, the reforms that we push for are obviously available to everyone, and so we want to make sure everyone has the opportunity to get the best maternal health outcomes that they can. So in 2020, we pushed for extending postpartum Medicaid coverage from 60 days to 12 months. 60 days was just a random amount that the federal government had put in terms of how long people had coverage after the end of pregnancy. And we know that, after childbirth, the health issues and concerns do not end just after 60 days. So we felt it was really important that new mothers had coverage for up to 12 months. So we're happy to see that legislation pass in 2020. That policy is currently awaiting federal approval, but we hope that it will become active very soon. Illinois became the first state to receive approval for this type of policy just a couple weeks ago. So we're hopeful that we can deliver some good news, and hopefully that will be active in the coming weeks. In 2021, the HAVE Coalition pushed for prenatal coverage regardless of immigration status. So Delegate Guzman mentioned this earlier, and she definitely was a champion on this. She introduced the budget amendment along with Senator McClellan to make this change. This will obviously be particularly important for undocumented individuals, and we expect that to be effective, the policy to become effective in July of 2021. So just in a couple months, we hope we see that change. So it's obviously going to be a big change for many families here in Virginia. The next area of health coverage that we were focused on was immigrant access, right? So in 2019, 658,000 people in Virginia remained without health coverage, and just over a quarter of total uninsured population in Virginia are foreign-born non-citizens. So this includes immigrants with legally residing status, refugees, DACA, undocumented immigrants, and more. We know that these high rates of people going uninsured is because many non-citizens, particularly undocumented immigrants, have many barriers to accessing health coverage. Undocumented folks are typically ineligible for programs like the Children's Health Insurance Program, Medicaid for people with lower incomes, and Medicare for older adults. So there's a lot of barriers for folks who are undocumented. So in 2020, we advocated for a budget item that ended what was known as the 40-quarter rule. You all may have heard of this, but just a quick reminder of what that was. It was a Medicaid eligibility rule that required lawful permanent residents who have been in the US for over 5 years to prove a 10-year work history. So this went beyond what the federal government said we had to do. And for context, Virginia was only one of 6 states to have this extra rule for Medicaid for its immigrant population. So we're happy to see that rule go away. It actually ended on April 1st of this year. And we are seeing some folks now getting access to health coverage for many, for the first time in their lives due to the elimination of this rule. So I've been excited to see that. CoverVA.org has had some information about that and has been very vocal on that. However, not everyone has a subscription to the CoverVA.org email, so I'm glad to be able to tell folks about it on this call. And for the next piece, 2021, we did a little bit of work around COVID services. I just want to be clear before I get into it that no one, regardless of immigration status or health insurance coverage, should need to pay anything for vaccines. That should be completely free, and it should be available to anyone regardless of status. So I don't want any confusion on that. And then the second piece is that if you are currently uninsured and need to go to the hospital for COVID-19 treatment, you should not be billed. There is a federal program by the organization HRSA, H-R-S-A, that should be paying hospitals and doctors for any treatment due to COVID-19, treatment for uninsured folks. So I just want to put that out there for folks who, so I don't want to confuse folks. But the next bill I'm going to talk about was out of an abundance of caution and particular concern for low income and undocumented people who needed to receive treatment for COVID. As we know, hospital stays can be very expensive, and we certainly don't want anyone to be left with a bill just because they need to get help for this pandemic. So in 2021, we supported legislation introduced by Delegate Lopez to ensure that everyone can access COVID-19 treatment regardless of immigration status. The bill kind of changed a bit during the legislative process, as it does. So the end wasn't exactly what we wanted, but it should mean that no one who is uninsured, regardless of immigration status, should have to pay out of pocket for COVID-19 treatment during the federal health emergency that the Biden administration renews. So that's great news, and so we're hopeful that folks will not hesitate to go get their healthcare needs met, especially when it comes to COVID-19. As we know, it's such a serious issue. And I'm gonna just turn my attention really quickly to possible next opportunities that we are kind of thinking about at the HAVE Coalition. One is the children's uninsured rates. So roughly 96,500 children in Virginia are uninsured, but when we break it down by race and ethnicity, Latinx children are disproportionately uninsured. While only making up 14% of the children population in Virginia, Latino children account for 35% of all uninsured children in the state. And so that's a very strong overrepresentation. Certainly some possible implications with the public charge rule that went into the effect in 2018, and certainly we want to make sure that every child in the state has access to coverage. So that's something that we're taking a look at right now. We're also thinking about long COVID. So how folks who had COVID are experiencing symptoms long after they have recovered and stopped being contagious. So we knew that Black and Latino and immigrant populations were impacted very strongly by the COVID-19 pandemic. So we had to make sure that as the long-term effects of COVID are being researched and we're learning more about that those folks in particular have the resources in order to get their health needs met. And the last thing I just mentioned was, we're obviously going to want to make the most of any federal opportunities. We want to make sure that Virginia is prepared to accept any opportunities from the federal government to provide more healthcare access. This could come in more money or extra flexibility to create some new programs. And there has been a conversation at the federal level around eliminating the 5-year wait period for programs like Medicaid. If someone becomes a legal permanent resident of the country, there's usually a 5-year wait to qualify for these programs. But there's certainly some conversations around eliminating that 5-year wait so folks can get coverage as soon as possible. And so that's something that we'll keep an eye on, and certainly something that we would support. So I know I had a few different policies in there. I'm happy to answer any questions, start dates or anything like that. And I'll also put in the coverva.org website in the chat and encourage folks to visit that. They actually have a section about new coverage for green card holders. That's what they're calling it. So that's the 44.
Thank you, Freddy. So we have time for one question. So if anybody, please, you can do it directly. But I'm sure, Freddy, we will have more questions because the information that you are providing is very important. So nobody, regardless of the legal status, should be paying for the treatment of the recovery of the COVID-19. That's very important, and we definitely will be providing that information with our community statewide.
Freddy, this is Patricia with Anthem. I'm a little bit confused. So when they go for the treatment, it's just the treatment, or if they stay in the hospital or the stay of the hospital as well?
So it should be for anything that has to do with the COVID-19 treatment. So if that includes a hospital stay, then it should include that stay. And so just to be clear, this would apply if someone comes to the hospital who is uninsured, right? If you have insurance, then your insurance company and you all, they all have that, they have a process for that. But if someone comes to a hospital and they're uninsured, they should not expect a bill, because the federal government is offering, they have a big fund for all hospitals and doctors who have to give treatment to anyone who has COVID, and they should get reimbursed through the federal government. Now, I think it's really important that we share that information about that to all hospitals and providers, and because it's an option on the hospital side. The patient basically has no control over what the hospital does, right? But we want to make sure that everyone is getting coverage and treatment, and that people know about the HRSA program. So, I would encourage folks talking to their doctors or, at the hospital and asking them about the HRSA program.
If they charge, do you have a place where we can go? Because I have seen a couple of them. Even though I work for Anthem, we see the uninsured parents. And sometimes they call me and ask me, where can I go for this bill? And if they do it, where can they go for that?
Yeah, and that's a big concern. The patients have very little recourse if the hospital decides to charge them, even though they shouldn't. I think it would be a conversation, hopefully, hoping that there's best intentions involved, that they would be able to call the hospital, talk to the billing folks, and let them know that they know about the HRSA program, the HRSA program, and that they are uninsured. So, they should seek reimbursement from the federal government. And that's obviously hoping best intentions on everyone's account. But that's certainly something that we've been thinking about, something that we tried to address with some of the bill language that we were supporting in 2021. As I said, the language changed a bit, so it made it a little bit less, it made it weaker in some ways, but certainly something that we're concerned about. And if you have stories like that, I would love to, connect with you, because that shouldn't happen.
So thank you, Freddy. Very important information. Yeah, so we are running out of time. I appreciate, Freddy, your presentation in this important event. Now I would like to welcome Maribel Castaneda. As you know, all this legislation wouldn't become law if the governor, Ralph Northam, wouldn't sign this. He signed it. That is the law of Virginia. So today we have Maribel Castaneda. She's the Director of Appointments and Director of Latino Outreach with the Governor Northam office. So always, I'm glad to have you, Maribel. So please go ahead, and thank you for being with us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Edgar, for your friendship, for your leadership, for that kind introduction. Well, good afternoon, good morning, or nearly afternoon. My name is Maribel Castaneda. I am the Director of Appointments, as Edgar said, and the Director of Latino Outreach for the Governor's Office. I support the appointment process for over 300 boards and commissions, and support with outreach to the Hispanic, Latino, and Latinx community. In my role, I've had the honor to join the governor in a number of conversations with Latino leaders and community organizations focused on the immigrant community that have discussed ways to improve resources and supports for new Virginians. Conversations around health, language access, removing barriers, and increasing educational opportunities for our students. I want to thank VACOLAO and Legal Aid Justice Center as they've remained key advocates during those conversations. And I also see a number of other advocates and supporters in this event who have also joined us. So thank you as well for your support. Governor Northam has said that America is a nation of immigrants and our communities are strengthened by hardworking individuals striving to create a better life for themselves and their children. This is the spirit that makes Virginia the best place to live, work, and raise a family. You've probably heard him say that a number of times. But in order to become the best place to live, work, and raise a family, we have to listen and be inclusive of all Virginians. And this administration has made it its priority to have their doors open for all Virginians. This year has been another important year for removing barriers in Virginia, and Governor Northam continues to support the immigrant community by signing key pieces of legislation that we've discussed today. He has made key decisions to support policy changes and create changes for the better. The governor signed legislation to provide COVID-19 relief, support efforts to ensure vaccines find their way to all Virginians, strengthen privacy protections on DMV databases, expand access to financial aid for immigrant students, provide emergency COVID-19 Medicaid to immigrant families and their to immigrants and their families by removing the 40 quarters rule and more. Additionally, I also wanted to highlight that on April 21st, Governor Northam wrote to President Joe Biden to include a path to citizenship for undocumented and essential workers in the next federal relief package, because he believes our essential workers deserve the opportunity to become American citizens. Governor Northam was the first governor in the nation to publicly back the proposal that would grant legal status for about 140,000 Virginians who are undocumented. He continues to stand by the immigrant community, establishing a formal Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Office of New Americans, and an advisory board made up of community leaders to help provide resources to our new Virginians. So I've shared this with you before, but as advocates, you continue to change the what is into what should be. So please continue your advocacy efforts, keep reaching out because we will keep listening. The impact of a governor's signature on a bill is because of you all. So continue to speak with your elected officials, help draft ideas for legislation, engage with the governor's advisory boards. That's a fantastic avenue to really reach out with the people that are supporting these different recommendations. Write letters from your organizations on policies that you're for or against. We like listening to both sides and really appreciate the different perspectives. And if you're unsure on who to reach out to, you can always reach out to any of our outreach directors. I'm one of 6. So we'll definitely get you to the right person because we want to continue to elevate your voices, listen and direct you to the appropriate person. So thank you again for your time, for your commitment and support. It's your dedication and hard work that has made this year again possible. Thanks, Edgar.
Thank you, Maribel. Thank you very much for these words, participating also in this virtual forum. Now, to close our event, I would like to call Beatriz Amberman, Chair of the Virginia Coalition of Latino Organizations, VACOLAO. Beatriz, thank you for joining us. I know you have some health issues, but thank you. Even with all that odds, you are with us. So Beatriz, go ahead.
Thank you for all your efforts, Edgar. And on behalf of the Virginia Coalition of Latino Organizations, I appreciate everyone joining us during this legislation debrief. VACOLAO, as you know, has served the Hispanic community in Virginia since its foundation in 2001. We have been advocating for the rights of Latinos and immigrants and work to educate, empower, and secure equal treatment, opportunity, and representation for Latinos in Virginia. And to achieve our mission, we have organized educational workshops, a Virginia Immigrant Advocate Summit every year. And as you saw today, we advocate every year on behalf of our community at the Virginia General Assembly. We have been doing it for the past 17 or 18 years. and we are proud of our advocacy work. We have an outstanding record of defeating hundreds of anti-immigration bills. We count among our proactive achievements the passage of all the laws that you heard us speak about today. But there is a lot to be done. We need to create better working conditions and prevent abuses in our undocumented immigrant population. We must bring legislative changes so that the need for labor in this country is achieved through legal immigration. During our elections also, we must demand the candidates don't use immigrants as a punching bag because it's easy to dehumanize and encourage hate and fear to be directed to defenseless people. And you know, everyone, regardless of citizenship, has the basic right to be treated as a human being. Our democratic government encourages its citizens to action, to involve ourselves in civic life, and to improve the condition of everyone in our community. America needs to continue setting the standards for democracy, human rights, and compassion in the world. And each of our individual destinies and the destiny of our nation depends on how we all work together in unity as a community. The Virginia Coalition of Latino Organizations invites you to continue partnering with us and the common goal to look after the well-being of our community and to protect the dignity of our families and workers. Please join our efforts. Join the efforts of VACOLAO to reach for a bright tomorrow in the spirit of unity, compassion, and justice. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, everybody. And that's how we are ending our event today. So we will have more events and we will be sending, please visit us and try Virginia Forward in the Virginia Coalition of Latino Organizations and put like and you will get all the information. Thank you very much and have a good day.